Hey YouTube, it's the test lead, and today's video is all the Selenium locators. Just to give a background, Selenium is one of the most popular automation tools used today. Selenium is very popular because of its versatility. It can be used with many different web browsers as well as many different programming languages. So let's say you want to test something on Google Chrome or Firefox, or using C# or Java, you can use Selenium for it. Selenium and automation tools in general are supposed to mimic real-life person interactions. So for example, let's say we go to google.com and then we type in what everyone types in daily, the test lead videos, and what comes up. So now let's try to mimic that process. We must map out the web elements on the page to items in our code. That's how we'll know what to click and when to click. And now you're probably asking, well, how do we do that? We're going to inspect the page. We can view the elements of the web page by pressing F12 or by right-clicking the page and then selecting the Inspect option and navigating to the Elements tab. We will be using the different attributes for a web element to help us. We then use Selenium's locators to access the different parts of this page, such as buttons and input search box. This video will cover the following Selenium locators: ID, XPath, class name, link text, partial link text, and tag name. So first off, using IDs. ID is probably one of the most common ways to identify an element on a web page, especially a static web page. A static web page means every time the page refreshes, the IDs and all the attributes stay the same. The thing is, you can only use the ID web element search attribute on static pages, because on dynamic web pages where every time the page refreshes a new ID is there, we can map out the ID to our code, because the mapping has to be done ahead of time so we run our code and knows what to look for. So when using the ID, refresh the page a few times first and make sure that the ID is still the same value. The syntax for an ID is by.id and then the name of the ID, where you replace name of the ID with the actual web element ID. The next method is by name. By name is very similar to by ID. However, by name using the name of that web element. The only problem is sometimes names repeat on a web page. So if you're using by name, make sure it's the only name on that web page. So we inspect the page, to Control F for that word or the name, and make sure it's just 1 of 1. If it says like 1 of 5, that means that name repeats somewhere on the page. So when you try to select it later, you're not going to be able to find it because that's 5 options to choose from. The syntax for name is by.name, name of the name, where you replace name of the name with the name of the element. The next method is class name. Class name is similar to ID and name, but now you're looking for the attribute of class. So whatever the class name is for that web element, you're going to find it by that. So class names are usually more unique than the regular names, but still class names may repeat, so be careful. The syntax for class name is by.classname, name of the class, where you replace name of the class with the name of the element class. Next up, tag name. The tag name is usually one of the first words in that web element. The only problem is it's usually never unique, so you should never, probably ever rely on just the tag name alone. Some common tag names are div, button, input. The syntax for tag name is by.tagname, then the name of the tag, where you replace name of the tag with the name of the element tag. This next one is where you start to get a little different without concepts and syntax. Linked text. So for this one, it takes the text that's displayed on a web page as the linked text. So let's say on a web page, it's displaying a certain word. We're going to try to find a web element by that word. The syntax for linked text is by.linkText, name of the text, where you replace name of the text with the text of the element. Next up, by partial linked text. So before we had by linked text, this is very, very similar, but instead of getting the full phrase or full word, we're showing a partial part of it. So let's say our linked text was, or the text being displayed on a web page is the word sneaker. By partial linked text, maybe we would search for the letters SNE, and then it can find it just off of that. So by partial linked text, you have a little bit more freedom, but you have to make sure that those 3 letters, the SNE, isn't also present on other parts of the page, or you might click the wrong element. The syntax for partial linked text is by.partial linked text, name of the text, where you will replace name of text with the text of the element that you want to use. Now these last 2 are the most reliable and probably the most common ones you'll see when using Selenium. First is by CSS selector. CSS is cascading style sheet, and that's how the styling is done on a web page. We will be using the styling of the web element to help us find it, which is one of the most unique ways of finding a web element. The syntax for CSS selector is by.CSS_selector HTML attribute equals value, where you will replace HTML with something along the lines of a tag name and then attribute equals value with an attribute such as ID or name and then a value for it. There's a lot more you can do with CSS selectors, but that'll be a whole separate video. But as you can see, CSS selectors combine the tag names with the attributes, so you're getting more unique values for your searches. And now finally, XPath. XPath is very tricky and very powerful, just like CSS selector. But instead of using the cascading style sheet of the web page, you can use the XML of the web page. However, the XML is a slower process of just searching, but it's still very accurate, very powerful. The syntax you'll see is very similar to CSS selector, but XPath has a few other tricks up its sleeve. The syntax for XPath selector is by.XPath tag name attribute equals value, where you replace tag name with the tag name and then attribute equals value will be an attribute such as ID or name and then a value for it. There's a lot more you can do with the CSS selectors as well as the XPath, but there'll be separate videos deep diving each one. But for right now, that's all you need to know. For high level Selenium selectors, you have the IDs, you have the tag names, you have class names, you have linked text, you have linked text's cousin by partial linked text, XPath, and CSS selector. Remember, Selenium is a very powerful tool when used correctly. In order to use it correctly, you need to know how to identify web elements on a web page. If you found this video helpful at all, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want another video just like this, please take care. If you have suggestions for future videos, please leave them below. And hey, don't forget to learn something new today.